So some of the lessons are so obvious we don't even have to talk about them because we all have the same problem. But I was thinking about this, and the phrase liar, liar, pants on fire came to me. I don't know why. And I thought, where in the world did that come from, and what in the world does it mean? It just bothered me. So I went searching on the web. And did you know that there is a website called All the Lies About the Origin of Liar, Liar? And here's the gem. Quote, one Yahoo Answers member, simply known as Bryce, cited a biblical verse featuring the line, "Thy trousers, they burn with a fire as though from heaven." Parentheses. This, of course, is not a real biblical verse. Bryce made it up. So I'm guessing Bryce set his own pants on fire. So we begin with this cancer of lies that has become a digital pandemic. It brings us to our 21st century problem. How do we know what truth is when lying has become an acceptable, sophisticated art? Now, before we go any further, we need to set one ground rule, all right? We need to clear one thing out in the very beginning. We're not going to call any names today. Even though we have knowledge about a confirmed liar of a certain magnitude, who's the most obvious illustration we can find. The commandment is pointed more specifically than don't lie, tell the truth. The commandment says, you shall not bear a false witness to your neighbor. It's about the ways that we are not to spend our time in telling lies about someone else that will hurt them, will put them at disadvantage, will alienate or persecute them, or make people think evil of them. But first we have to focus on us, because that's where the problem is. And James is one of the earliest of the letters that we have in the New Testament. It is a teaching of James, principally to the church in Jerusalem, where he was the first pastor. And he's pretty straight up about this problem, isn't he? Because he tells us what a deep problem it is for all of us and all of history. He says that we're supposed to be careful about the match in our mouths that can start a firestorm with a lie. How do we manage our own witness? How do we witness to truth in this age? How is it that we followers are called to be careful controllers of what comes out of our mouths? James' warning can make us afraid to speak at all. Aren't you kind of afraid to talk about most anything that's controversial? Well, there's a clue that helps us in this thing. It's the word witness. False witness. Witness is a really particular word, isn't it? We don't use it a lot. We use it in the church a lot. Where else do we use it? In court. In court. And it puts conditions and stipulations on it. You don't just speak in court and say anything you want to. It confines you to a different kind of thing, doesn't it? What does it require you to do? To tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? What else? It has to be, So help you God, that's right. Yeah, and a lot of us need help with that. So what else about a witness is really important? You don't give opinions, right? You have to give first-hand information, right? No hearsay. No hearsay. It has to be something that you objectively have heard. Now, we all know that one of the problems is we all hear things differently because we've all sat in that circle at a party, you know, and you're supposed to say the same thing to everybody, and when it gets around to the corner, it's unrecognizable, right? So we all have that kind of problem that is part of that whole bigger thing about our perception stuff. But it has to be something we know. It also means that we have to know what it was about. So we get expert witnesses. Not anybody can go up there and say something about some things. They have to know what they're talking about. And so it's about sources. It's about reliability, isn't it? That's so a false witness is something that's the opposite of that. It's something who's talking out of turn, who's someone who's a gossip who passes on what is said, someone who's speaking about something about which they know nothing or know little. And sometimes that happens. And sometimes it really hurts. And sometimes it's said in order to hurt the person. And sometimes it's a flat out lie to put that other person at disadvantage, right? You shall not bear false witness. So how about a strategy for trying to speak and witness without starting a fire? Because isn't that why we stay silent? Someone says something that we would disagree with, or we know someone has an opinion or has an idea or has a source or otherwise, and we just rather not get into it. How do we speak positively so that we can have a witness as a Christian to the good and about all of these 10 commandments? Well, first you have to speak about something you know from a reliable source that you have. And if you can't do that, you have to be open and say, you know, I can't speak about this much because I just don't know that much about this. And that puts a potential fire back in the mouth. And that's important to do because a lot of times when we start stretching in conversations, that's when it starts getting difficult. And with that, the second thing we can do is listen to the other person. Because when we listen to the other person, there's something that can happen with us. We can become a questioner instead of a counter to what they say. Because we need to know where they're coming from. We need to know what their sources are. We want to know where they got the idea and how that came about. And we want to know what they think about the idea. And so asking questions is a whole lot better than starting a debate. Because what happens in a debate? It becomes an argument. And an argument becomes a fire. So just thinking about the questions that can come up and trying to understand where that person's coming from can really help to keep something a discussion where you can enter new ideas and possibilities. The other thing is to declare your sources that are reliable and ask them what their sources are. Because all of us are only limited to knowing what we've been told and what we've read. And so we have sources and they have sources. You know, one of the things that I learned in moral theology is the mind cannot choose what the mind cannot conceive. And so if you can't think something, you can't think something's right. You can't make a decision out of something that you have know nothing about. And so we are all limited, to the awarenesses that we have. That's what's so great about going to some country that's completely different from Texas. Like, say, New York. You walk down the street and all of these languages and all of this stuff and everything, and you realize, man, the world is really huge. There are a whole lot of things I don't know. And finally, we can always remember that there are more than two sides to most every question. We've talked about this before. We are an either-or culture. We are a choose sides culture. It goes back to the Constitution and the fight over it. And we love to do this, and so we're a two-party system. We force people to choose sides instead of saying, well, there are three other ways to think about this. Or did you ever think that maybe the new genetics and the things that we're learning in science are changing the whole way we see sexual identity? Right? We've talked about that. Or that adultery is not just sex between a man and someone who's not his wife when he has one. Adultery is when we take a human being and make them an object, nothing but something to satisfy our own desires. And that goes lots of different directions. There are always ways that we can recast the conversation in a discussion if we keep it from becoming a fight between two sides. And there's one other thing that we just have to have as a kind of foundation thing in this, especially because we're in this room. And we have to always keep in mind what James' warning really is. We answer to the Lord and Master for what comes out of our mouths. The flip side of that is that we also have the possibility of naming our source and our authorities when we have opinions. And we can say, when it comes to that problem, the way I have to look at this is I'm a Christian and I'm a follower and I need to be faithful. And so the way I see this is the person that I follow says that I have to have compassion for the people that no one loves. And if I have to do that, then I have to look at these people differently. So they're not invading foreigners. They're people that God made that are desperate and are trying to flee for their lives. And oh yes, some of them are evil, but guess what? Some of us are evil too. You see how it changes things? And the other thing it does is it gives us the chance to say, well, you go to church, right? Yeah, I go to church. So, well, what does this commandment mean to you about bearing false witness? How does that work? What does it mean to you? The Ten Commandments are a big deal. They're as close as you get to the commandment to love God with all your heart and mind and soul and strength and love your neighbor as yourself. They're a big deal. but they have a problem. They're do-nots. And with Jesus, we see those constantly translated into do commands. So we can also be positive. We can say the positive word, telling truth that's good for everyone. We can call everyone to live by looking at their own actions and their own attitudes more than judging others when they don't really know much about them. We can be witnesses bearing good news and seeing what's right with what's around us, and seeing that as an example of things that can be magnified and spread abroad. We can take a hint from James Russell Lowell's old poem that became a famous hymn, and even James Russell Lowell would change some of the words today. Once to every man and nation comes a moment to decide. New occasions teach new duties. Time makes ancient goods uncouth. After all, the word gospel means good news. It comes down to trying to bless and not curse. Remember the importance of loving the neighbor in the command? Who is our neighbor? That's what that ruler asked, and Jesus told the story of a good Samaritan. Said the guy in the ditch bleeding is the neighbor. The one in need is the neighbor. Anyone in need is the neighbor. And some people are in need of hearing the truth for the first time so they can choose it. There's a difference between cussing and cursing. Cursing always has a target against the neighbor. It labels the neighbor evil when that neighbor may not be evil at all. All of us are human. All of us have these tongues that chronically show our immaturity, and they make us just a little less than human. But we have a model. And gentleness born of the wisdom of humility about all of the things that we don't know for sure will help keep our mouths from spreading the forest fires of lies. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the people who hear and tell good news, for through them others will grow in faith and hope and love. Amen.